Thank you very much. So good afternoon, everyone. As Joyce mentioned, my name is Jaren Porciello, and I'm wearing two hats today. So one of the hats that I'm wearing is as a data and computer scientist. I work with large language models to do textual analysis. And so for the past, 3 to 4 months, half of my day is spent answering questions about how GTP, is going to destroy the world versus the other half of the day of how it's going to save the world. So I was having a family hold back moment during the previous panel conversation. We were talking about large language models, and I figured we'd have a chance to revisit that topic here. The other hat that I wear is as a university researcher. So I spent 15 years at Cornell University studying international agriculture and rural development. I now work at the University of Notre Dame as an associate professor in the School of Public Policy. And what I'm really excited to be able to talk to you about today is some ongoing work that we're doing with the Research for Life community to look at ways that artificial intelligence can support the SDGs. So first and foremost, progress on the SDGs, the Sustainable Development Goals, is in grave danger. And this grave danger is not my assessment. This is an assessment from the UN Secretary General, Antonio Guterres, who has said that we're in grave danger and we're calling on all partners to really double down on their efforts. And when we take a step back and we think about this in terms of sometimes the UN likes to tell us things are in grave danger, often. But why does this matter? Why, in particular, does it matter that the SDGs are in grave danger and that progress is slipping? Well, if you look here, 191 UN member states in 2015 signed on to 17 Sustainable Development Goals. Within those 17 development goals are 169 very specific indicators that all of those countries have agreed to measure progress on. And I don't know if you've sat in statistical committee meetings with governments for 3 days and fought over comma placement all 3 of those days, but it's a good time. It's really a good time. But coming out of those meetings after 3 days with agreement and alignment on 169 indicators that everyone's going to measure in the same way is actually pretty significant. It's the biggest call to action that we've ever had across governments. So this is why it matters, right? When we look at progress, we know why progress is slipping. Obviously, we're coming out of a global pandemic. We're living in a time of increased conflict. There's a lot of reasons why progress is slipping. But it is important to know that it is happening and that there's a call to action to sort of double down on efforts. And I think for folks in this room, why that matters is this, to me, is kind of the flip side of being very inspiring. Science is our best bet to achieve progress on the SDGs. And for me, I think that's actually really exciting. When we think about science as a best bet to help save humanity, to help make the world a better place, that's pretty powerful. And when we think about science, of course, we're thinking about not only making published outputs of science more accessible, more available, but also the work, the patents, the actual applications of science that come out of that. So I know many people in this room have participated through their organizations and or through kind of personal efforts to be a part of the SDG community. But I think this is a moment for us to really reflect on what are the opportunities and what are the actions that we can take to really double down on the SDGs. So as I mentioned, if I kind of take a step back, though, we've got 2 really complex systems. We've got science and scientific publishing, and we've got the SDGs. These are incredibly complex systems, right? So it's worth kind of taking a step back and then thinking about opportunities for more complex benchmarking in terms of assessing progress. And so, in full disclosure, so I'm a Friends of Research for Life board member, and we partnered up at the beginning of this year to start thinking about opportunities to really benchmark progress that Research for Life is making to support the SDGs, and then to take that one step further to think about what's the contribution that we would be able to make back to the scientific and publishing community in terms of providing some new metrics. So we've teamed up to basically create a content gap analysis, and I'll go through that now. So there's kind of there's 3 questions here, but there's 2 parts of this assessment. One is to be able to look kind of across the discipline of publishing to better understand where content gaps exist. And here we're looking at content gaps not just at the individual articles, as Anne previously previewed, but really looking at this in terms of publication opportunities. So within the SDGs, one of the most essential components is that they are interdisciplinary, right? So teams of interdisciplinary researchers come together to produce SDG research. And so we're looking for opportunities for more interdisciplinary publishing. And then the second part of this analysis question is much more specific to Research for Life. And that's to better understand where are there opportunities to either invite publishers in who have existing content to deliver content and to deliver access to journals to researchers living in low and middle income countries, as well as looking for materials related to the SDGs but do not yet participate in Research for Life. So the starting point for this content analysis is SDG 2, which is the goal to end zero hunger. And this was, an SDG that I know a little bit about. And so this is where we started with our content gap analysis. So the data set includes 10,500 journals from across all publishers. This includes smaller society publishers. This includes major publishers, as well as materials coming from the Directory of Open Access Journals. We evaluated the data set using SDG2 indicators. So again, at the level of kind of very specific things that countries are measuring, can we find alignment between the journals themselves, journal content, and these indicators? And we used large language models with the goal of trying to train a model that could be adaptive and reusable across any of the SDGs. So these are some kind of very early results here. So what we have in the dark blue is relevance to a sub-indicator. And I'll go through this in a little bit more detail. And then in the lighter blue, we have sort of the relevant journals. So relevant journals, that's the light blue higher bars. This includes basically assessing journals based on their title and their journal aims and descriptions to kind of create a relevancy benchmark. And then to say across those relevancy benchmarks, SDG 2.1 has more to do with food access. Right, so what's the opportunity to basically not just produce food, but ensure that food is available and accessible by communities. SDGs 2.3, incomes and productivity, really looks at the opportunities to increase productivity of small-scale producers and ensure that they have access to an equitable livelihood. SDG 2.4, improved environment, and SDGs 2.5, biodiversity. We're continuing work on the nutrition indicator because that's a little tricky. It measures nutrition as caloric intake. What the takeaway from this is while we have, I think high degrees of relevant journals across these sub-indicators, overall, the opportunities for what the relevance is to the sub-indicators assessed through table of contents over the last 2 years is pretty, well, it's not so good in some cases. For improved environments and biodiversity in particular, we really don't have a great match in terms of relevancy versus what's actually being published at the level of a journal. And so I think this is kind of important, and it builds on what Anne was talking about. When we're not measuring things at the level of individual articles and what their contribution is, but when we take a step back and we try to measure this across, something that's a little bit broader at the level of journals, we see the data, a little bit differently. So happy to talk more about this, obviously, in the discussion, but just in conclusion, I think that there's a few things to highlight here. One is that there are new publishing opportunities that are really needed to drive forward the SDGs, and I would advocate that those include more interdisciplinary researchers based on some of this analysis. The second thing is, and I hope we get into this more in discussion, SDGs are really about mission-driven implementation science, right? It's not necessarily as helpful, and I want to be real careful how I say this, it's not necessarily as helpful to have theoretical results in a laboratory that are going to take 10 years to get to the field, which is the case in my field in agriculture, right? It can take 10 years. in order to test something in the lab and actually see results in the field. That being said, we want to see that research continue. It's really, really critical and important. But we need to balance that with opportunities to see more solutions-driven research now. And we heard from the panel that was talking about kind of incentives for researchers to go through the tenure track. And I would say that these incentives are more geared toward thinking about higher level theoretical research and less about mission-driven research. And the question that we can maybe have discussion about is, what can the publishing community do, if anything, to help address that discrepancy? Thank you very much.